Hello, this is Sibyl Schaefer and Paige Walker. We are going to be talking about an NDSA publication we released recently called Good Migrations, a checklist for migrating your digital preservation infrastructure. Matt Schultz, Linda Tadic, and Nathan Tallman also worked with us on this publication. Next slide. So the goal of the Good Migrations checklist is really to provide a list for what you will want to do or think through before and after moving digital materials and metadata forward to new digital preservation systems and or infrastructures. The idea for creating this checklist actually originated back in 2015 as part of the NDSA infrastructure working group. I've listed the folks who got it up and running back in 2015 on our slide. As some of you might remember, the NDSA back then still had its organizational home as part of the Library of Congress. And this document kind of fell into a little bit of the gap as the infrastructure working group was reconstituted and NDSA kind of made its home in Clear DLF. And it wasn't really picked back up until this past July of 2020 when Nathan Tallman and I both kind of had the idea, kind of remembered it and had the idea that it would be good to restart. So we created a working group to do just that. And we published the final document earlier this year. Next slide. So one of the most significant changes that we made to the checklist since the 2015 version was to reorganize it to reflect the functional areas of the NDSA levels of preservation, which are storage, integrity, control, metadata, and content. We also included a general section for tips that either don't fit into any levels area or was applicable to more than one area. And this really turned out to be a useful way of grouping like checklist items together and making the list easier to read and understand. Next slide. Once we had a solid working draft in place, we put out a call for community feedback. This had also been done in the earlier iteration of the document. So we had decided to do it again after the checklist items were grouped into the levels area, just to verify kind of that grouping made sense and to see what kind of feedback we got. And we received a lot of feedback. We want to thank you to those who provided it. We spent a lot of meetings reviewing the feedback and in many cases adding additional items to the checklist or revising checklist items based on the comments that we received. We did have a fair number that we declined, and we did those predominantly because we wanted to keep the checklist tightly scoped, make sure that it was still short, a short checklist rather than like a big, huge document. And also so that it was not too specific to particular situations or system infrastructure, architectures or tools, etc. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Paige.
Thank you, Sibyl. So now that Sibyl's provided a general overview of our Good Migrations checklist, I'll do more of a deep dive into one of the quote unquote levels that we've used to reorganize this digital preservation migration checklist. Before I do that though, I wanted to give us all a refresher on the NDSA levels of preservation, since I don't think too many of us have them memorized just yet. In particular, I wanted to look at the control level that we'll be using as an example in this presentation. So control largely covers the human and software agents that have access or other permissions to the digital preservation content and metadata in your system. So level 1 is determining what these agents are and if they should be authorized to read, write, move, or delete content. Level 2 is documenting the agents and applying these documents to your systems. Level 3 is maintaining logs and identifying the agents that have performed actions on your digital preservation content. And level 4 is periodically reviewing these logs for actions and access taken by the human and software agents to make sure that no one or nothing is accessing something that they should not be. So now I'll take that NDSA level of control and look at how we've mapped it in the planning the migration and after the migration sections of our checklist. So we have kind of collapsed all 4 levels of control into just one general bucket of control rate related issues in migration. So we're not keeping that same granularity of specificity in control, but rather we're just looking at similar content types. So for instance, we say review identity and access management policies and permissions, including the list of agents and user roles that have access to your system, which we saw is almost exactly the same language used in the levels of preservation. Assess these accounts and their corresponding permissions and revise them as necessary, especially looking at administrative or pseudo access that can change a lot of other permissions, give other agents the ability to read, write content that they shouldn't necessarily have. Ensure that all of your green lighted accounts will continue to have access to the new system. So no one gets blocked out or locked out if they shouldn't be. If you're using encryption, identify and document your keys and key escrows that need to be migrated. Plan for any changes in your key management and how the ability to decrypt post-migration will be verified. Because it's important to be able to decrypt your content once you're on a new system. Maintain logs of the migration, so it'll be easier to identify at which points any errors occurred, and ensure that restricted digital objects remain inaccessible to unauthorized users during and after the transfer. Sometimes this might require the use of an additional encryption layer, such as using SSH on the command line or HTTPS if you're using a web interface for the migration. So now shifting to the after the migration section of our document, still looking at that same control line, you would determine that all of your attributes such as permission, creation dates have transferred as planned. Document those same access policies, including those lists of agents that you thought should have access to certain levels of content in your system. Especially look at those administrator or pseudo accounts to make sure that you haven't accidentally given someone the permission to change everyone else's access if you didn't intend to do that. Ensure that identity and access management has migrated as expected, and retire or delete those accounts that were supposed to be temporary, or for instance, people who have left your library and no longer need access, those sorts of things. Verify that encrypted content can be decrypted, perhaps by spot checking or doing something a little more systematic as your library needs. So with that, I'll wrap it up. I'd love to say thank you again to the authors, both on the 2015 document and in the 2020 document, who've made this come to fruition. Thanks to everyone who gave feedback, and thanks to you all as well for attending this talk today.